So let me go across to Rajiv Dogra first on the meeting between Anthony Blinken and the Indian Foreign Affairs Minister. We saw what happened in the morning where Dr. Jaishankar welcomed all the foreign ministers of the G20 nations, the Prime Minister's very brief virtual address at Rashtrapati Bhavan. Given the disagreement that we've seen on the issue of the use of the word war in Bengaluru, what do you think Anthony Blinken and Jaishankar would be focusing on most in their bilateral meeting just now? Rajiv?
Ukraine. And it's unfortunate that Ukraine...
Go on, sir.
The issue really is Ukraine and how to bring it in a manner that pleases the West, but at the same time it will displease Russia and China. So that balance is really the key, and that will be difficult to achieve, as happened at the finance ministers meeting recently, and as had nearly happened in Bali when Indonesia was the chair of G20. The other unfortunate aspect of all this is that economic issues were supposed to be always the key of G20. Political issues were not really meant to interfere in the economic resolutions of world's problems. Unfortunately, over the last few months, the change has taken place suddenly and drastically.
No, but what has changed since Indonesia?
Ukraine.
When that G20 summit happened in Indonesia, everybody agreed on certain wordings. Now they're opposing to the same wordings, including China, which at that time signed off on that resolution which included the word war.
Well, what has changed is the perception of America and its allies that China is now directly going to supply arms to Russia for its fight in Ukraine. That is the big difference, and they don't know how to handle it, because if China has really started supplying or is going to supply arms to Russia, then it is to the disadvantage of West's own arrangements in Ukraine, and it will also be strategically a signal to the West that, look, you are no longer fighting Russia in Ukraine, you may be fighting a proxy war with China also in Ukraine. And
but China has denied that report, that so-called supposed intelligence report which said China would be selling weapons or supplying weapons to Russia. They've actually come out and denied. So it's not as if the Chinese have officially come out and denied that report. If that was even partially true, they wouldn't have done so.
Well, Rahul, you are absolutely right. They have denied. But what else do you expect? Will they say that, yes, we are openly supplying arms to Russia? No, they want to keep that fig leaf with them because it gives them a tactical advantage. They don't want to confront America right now. In fact, they did not confront America even when their speaker, Nancy Pelosi, went to Taiwan. China showed great restraint.
I partly disagree with what you're saying in terms of the West selling weapons, because Prabhu Dayal, even before Bali, the West was providing weapons to Ukraine. So they may have provided tanks of the kind that weren't provided earlier, but it's not as if the supply of weapons to Ukraine is new. It's happened for a year now since the beginning of this war. So what do you think has changed from Bali, which leads to China now having its backup on the use of words which they'd agreed to in Indonesia?
Well, for one thing, there is greater polarization today than there was at the time of the Bali summit. The war has now gone on for over a year, and the positions of the two sides have hardened. Now, it's a very tricky situation because, as Rajiv mentioned, China will deny that it is supplying or intends to supply any weapons, but China is very devious and very deceptive. It will do what suits its own interest, and it will put on a facade of doing something else. So I suspect that the West's apprehensions may be well-founded, that now there is going to be an escalation of the conflict with Chinese weapons flowing into Russia, and therefore the West is also hardening its position. So I don't see any easy way out, and I don't think much has changed since last week when the G20 finance ministers met in Bangalore. So I don't really expect a communique to be something that will be worked out very easily. It will present very serious difficulties.
You know, Mr. Dogra, do you want to tell us, therefore, what is the best case result for India out of this G20 foreign ministers meet? What is the best case that we can get?
Well, I think ultimately, if worst comes to worst, there will have to be a statement by the chair, that means Jaishankar's statement, which sort of does not ruffle either West or Russia, China's feathers. That's the best way, because the compromise seems unlikely. And secondly, I think it will be good for Indian diplomacy if we try to restore the focus of G20 on economic issues, on the issues facing the global south of debt repayment, which has been sidestepped in finance ministers' meeting by passing on the responsibility to multilateral institutions, which is a very bureaucratic way out of a problem. So, best way out is very problematic. The best way out would be that if they leave with half satisfaction back to their capitals.